This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, and you are listening to the Walk Humbly podcast.
Welcome to this special edition of the Walk Humbly podcast. I'm Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese and your co-host. We want to begin by thanking everybody who has given to the Bishop's Lenten Appeal, both this year and throughout the years. You have made this podcast and this studio possible, so thank you so much. Please make sure you rate this podcast or write a review wherever you're listening. And if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and ring that notifications bell. Sign up for our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org, and you can follow Bishop Burbidge on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, where every day you can read a short gospel reflection for that particular day. Make sure you're following the diocese on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Send your questions for Bishop Burbidge to info@arlingtondiocese.org. Before we kick off here, a reminder that we are still registering for the Eucharistic Symposium on October 22nd at the Cathedral of St. Thomas More. It's going to be a wonderful event. We're going to have a Mass in the Cathedral. Bishop Burbidge is our celebrant. The homilist is Archbishop Chaput, the Archbishop Emeritus of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. He'll also be offering a reflection and a question and answer session. There'll be adoration and benediction as well. Seating is limited, so please make sure you go to arlingtondiocese.org and register now. Today's topics, we're at 100 episodes of the Walk Humbly podcast. And since today's episode represents a benchmark milestone, we won't be covering any news like we normally do. Rather, we're going to look back, and at the end, we'll do something special to help set the stage for the future of this podcast. I now welcome your host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, how you doing?
Billy, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. And thanks for promoting the event with Archbishop Chaput next Saturday. And as you said, it's free, but we need to register because we do have limited seating. But I hope there will be many there to listen to Archbishop Chaput. He's a very gifted speaker and very engaging with the questions and answer period.
Very good. Well, like I said, we're at 100 episodes, and so before I get in some of the specific questions, I'm just curious, how does it feel to be at 100 of these?
Wow, it is really hard to believe. 100 episodes, and yet it's always one of the highlights of my ministry. I really appreciate this venue to be able to speak with the faithful of the diocese and also to listen to them, because we always invite their comments and also questions from the faithful. So this is always a very, for me, a very important part of my ministry, but one that I thoroughly enjoy doing. So,
and as we look back on this, I actually want to get your reaction to a clip from the very first episode of the podcast. What made you want to specifically begin a podcast? There's lots of media. We're engaging in different ones. Why did you want to do this?
Well, as I say often, I think that as a church, we should use every tool possible to get out the good news of the gospel, the good news of all the great ministries occurring here in the diocese, the good news of the truth that we can bring out into the public arena. And we use as many of these social media tools and resources possible. Podcasts is also effective, and I hear that for many who spend time in traffic, podcasts is also a way of engaging with our parishioners.
So listening to that clip and hearing you explain 100 episodes ago your intent and the purpose behind the podcast, it sounded similar to the way you describe it for people today. Has your rationale for continuing with the podcast changed much over time?
No, not really, Billy. The core purpose of hosting the podcast is the same. I want to proclaim the gospel, the beautiful teachings of our faith, relevant to the topics and issues that are facing us as a church, as a world, as a nation, the lives of our parishioners. So when we decided to launch a podcast, it was very important to me that we brought to the faithful the topics that were of most interest to them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we discover those podcasts based on the correspondence that we receive, what I'm hearing out when I visit the parishes. And we come back, and you and we discuss, this is what I'm hearing. Let's move this to the podcast. So, because these are the issues that are confronting people in this day and age. And the podcast gives us a great opportunity to do that. And it, as I said earlier, it allows me to listen, and sometimes, to deal with the issues that are sometimes very significant, not always pleasant, and sometimes serious. I know that sometimes our most listened to episodes address some of the troubling issues that we faced in the past 6 years within our church. if I simply answered easy questions or took only light topics, I don't think anyone would listen.
Right.
And for good reason.
True. Right.
This has remained an effective way of communicating to faithful because I believe that we listen to the concerns and we address the issues of our day to the best of our ability.
Yeah. And I would imagine that could be hard at times dealing with some of those issues, and that you've engaged in topics that, are not what you would have picked if you could have scripted it yourself and decided exactly, but you've been deliberate about choosing like what are in the headlines and what are on people's minds.
Right, exactly. And I think, all of our parents out there could relate to that. Anyone in leadership role could relate to that, sometimes you have to address that elephant in the room in a sense. And if you fail to address it, then you're not going to get that attention, that respect for which we, want to ensure. So as a spiritual father, I do not get to pick or to choose the issues of our time. But we do have the opportunity to deal with them faithfully and prayerfully. We always pray, of course, before we record a podcast so that, Lord, it's your breath, it's your heart, it's your word that we wish to communicate to our listeners. And I'm merely the instrument. And again, we don't pick the issues that are facing us at any given time.
That's right. Bishop, in the lead up to this episode, some folks reached out that wanted to congratulate you on this milestone of hitting 100 episodes. And so we'll play a few batches throughout this episode. But let's hear from the first group and we'll get your thoughts.
Hi, my name is Greg Erlinson. I'm the Director of Catholic News Service. On behalf of all my staff, I wish to congratulate Bishop Burbidge on the 100th episode of his Walk Humbly podcast. Bishop Burbidge, you have been a strong supporter of communications in your diocese, both in print and digital. Your desire to use the Walk Humbly podcast to communicate directly with your people is a model of 21st century leadership and a testament to your faithfulness in service to the Church. May your efforts continue to thrive and bear fruit for the sake of the gospel. God bless.
This is Tracy Sable with EWTN News Nightly. My sincerest congratulations to you, Bishop Burbidge, on the 100th episode of your wonderful Walk Humbly podcast. Thank you for all that you do, and especially for being a strong leader willing to tackle and talk about the tough issues. Please be assured of my prayers as you continue your incredible work. May God bless you and your ministry always.
Hello, Bishop Burbidge. It's Teresa Tomeo from Ave Maria Radio and EWTN's Catholic Connection. I want to say a hearty congratulations on your 100th episode. That's amazing, of your wonderful Walk Humbly podcast. First of all, having partnered with you and your wonderful diocese on a fabulous communications project, I know the type of work that you do, and I know how committed you are to making a difference in the Church and in the culture. So big thank you for that. I also know, as someone who's been in radio and media for eons, how difficult it is and challenging at times to produce really good content for a podcast, a radio program, a TV show, for an online webcast, whatever you're doing on a regular basis. So thank you for your dedication. I know all your listeners and viewers are blessed. Keep it up, and we hope for 100,000 more episodes of Walk Humbly. Ciao.
All right, Bishop, those are a few heavy hitters.
Yeah, thank you, Billy. It's nice colleagues of mine that I've had the privilege to work with in other areas, and it's so great. It was so great to hear from Tracy and Greg and Teresa, and I really appreciate that. But Teresa said something very important, that it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to make the podcasts fruitful. And that's a real credit to you and to your team also. We are surrounded with a great team here, and the podcast is a result of that. So I believe my colleagues were congratulating all of us.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. And for those listening, if you want to see any of these video shout outs that were sent in, go to our Facebook page or Instagram, and you could see these for yourself and see those. In a minute, we're going to look back at some of the most listened to episodes and talk about those. But first, does any particular episode or episodes even stand out in your memory when you look back on them?
Yeah, some of the episodes that are the most listened to episodes that you're going to mention do stand out because of the sometimes the sensitivity or the importance or the how crucial it was to address those issues in a timely way. And to have the venue to do that was very, very helpful. But I think the episodes I enjoyed the most were the ones where I invited young people on the podcast.
That's right.
We don't always have guests, but every once in a while we had some young people on the podcast, specifically the ones we record at work camp. When we did a live recording at Rally with high schoolers was another example. So I was really energized by the young people who certainly were very comfortable with the podcast and the microphone, and they did a great job, but they brought such energy to our discussion. And what I appreciated most about those was the honesty and transparency of our young people. Sometimes as a bishop, you worry that you don't always hear what people are really thinking. I don't have to worry about that with our young people. Credit to them, maybe credit to their parents that they have created that trusting environment where they can express their opinions in a respectful way, but in a very honest way. And they're forthright. And that brought so much life to the podcast, and it gave me an opportunity, I hope, to show our young people that I trust them and I respect them, and I truly do.
Yeah, those were a lot of fun. I remember we did a live one at Rally one time with high schoolers, and you invited them to the microphone to ask questions. And it's similar with work camp. They noted like they were proud that you trusted them. Like you didn't, kind of box them in or here's your question to ask or anything like that. It's just it was an open mic and they could go ask what they wanted to, and you trusted them and they respectfully responded. And it wasn't always great news. There was challenges maybe. There was a lot of good things that they said too. Right. But I know they valued that trust that you put in them. Yeah, so when we look back at some of the most, most listened to episodes during COVID-19, there was a tremendous amount of listenership because we were making updates about, masses and public celebrations of masses and different events that were closing down. We talked about, were the COVID vaccine moral? That was a big question that people were asking about. Mask updates, certainly during a lot of protest and unrest in the country. Black Lives Matter riots and so on that were happening, vandalism of statues, questions about police use. But some of the really good ones I remember were priest assignments. That's always a big one on our website. We could barely keep the website up during that. Priestly ordinations. I saw a number of them come up in some of the most listened to. People want to hear what you have to say when you've ordained these men. A lot of presidential, topics that come up, especially around elections and those kinds of things. Lots of good questions. So when we look back at the top 10 or so podcasts in terms of listenership, I was surprised that some of the most downloaded were not necessarily the oldest ones, but some of the more recent ones. They range from episodes like 45 to 77, actually. So what do you think some of those topics that were the most listened to? What does that say about the podcast and the role of the podcast in your ministry here as a bishop?
Well, news moves so quickly. And, when there are news items that are catching the attention of the people in the church, but also in our world, our nation, our community, that are being talked about in the workplace, in the school community, in the neighborhood, people want to hear about what is the church thinking, what is the church saying, and so it's not surprising to me that some of the most listened to episodes were about very serious issues confronting us as a nation, and it's just that's the great thing about a podcast. It's not old news when we're talking about it. It's actually happening when we're talking about it. And I like as you begin every podcast that you ask for feedback. To make sure that how is what we're saying relating to people, and we do take that very seriously, and to make sure that and sometimes we learn that maybe there's a better way of saying that, or maybe there's a different way of doing that, or maybe we have to be more clear, and so that engagement is always a great highlight.
It also helps put in perspective for people how we as Catholics should be reading the news. You've heard people say, like, we need a Bible and catechism in one hand and the newspaper in the other, that visual, that we're engaged in society, and everything from your pastoral letter on gender ideology. Boy, that's one that we've gotten a lot of feedback on, because people are wanting to know, how do I understand this as a Catholic. Politicians and their position on abortion or their position on immigration, whatever it might be. You've helped create, I think, a framework for people where they can feel like they're more connected to the positions of the church on fundamental issues, and then also just how do you perceive these in a prudential way?
Right.
Also,
and we also, I think, learned. We don't always get to talk about the brightest way that the light's shining on us as a church or as a diocese or whatever. In the course of these 100 episodes, we went through some challenging times, even this scandal,
That's right.
Of former Cardinal McCarrick, and but that was an issue that we had to talk about, and I think it was very important for people to hear from me directly. And again, we saw that it was one of the most listened to podcasts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it wasn't something that we were proud of.
Right.
But we could not just ignore it.
Right.
And we were talking about that as it was occurring, and we got feedback. And again, every time we get feedback, it isn't always the most favorable. Sometimes it's, I wish you would have, elaborated on this, or I think you could have, that's great. I welcome that because we always want to get better at what we're doing, how we're communicating.
And a written statement, as valuable as that can be and as far as that can go, and the secular media can pick that up and so on, it doesn't convey your heart as a pastor, right? You're not a CEO.
Exactly.
You're a bishop. There's a whole different role. And I hope the podcast, you have felt that has been a good tool for your ministry in conveying not just what you think, but who you are as an individual, and how you feel about these issues.
Absolutely, because I'm often surprised, of what I say, supposedly. That
doesn't sound like me.
That's what happens. It's like people hear something from someone who heard something from someone who says something, and it's like, the podcast says, no, this is I am speaking right now.
Right.
This is my voice, and it's not coming in from a third source or anything like that. Sometimes we can't avoid that.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have used the occasion of a podcast to say, I don't want some other person in news media coming up with my quote, or coming up with the headline, or just taking piece of what I'm saying. Billy, I want to talk directly to the faithful of my diocese. And there's been many times when people, and it happens all the time, every week, where people will say, I wish the bishop would talk about this, or I wish he would say that. And your wonderful team is able to say, well, can I send you the link? Mm-hmm. Because actually just a week ago, Bishop did. And people say, oh, really? Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And they get to we're not telling them what to think, or they're able to make their own judgment, but just listen to it the source, the real source. And people usually are appreciative of that.
Yeah, it is interesting because people say, when's he going to speak out about, well, we can send them 4 episodes where you address it thoroughly. It gives them a lot of relief. Yeah. Our 4th most popular episode led out with the discussion as to whether or not the COVID vaccines were moral. And I found that very reassuring because it showed that the faithful wanted to do the right thing, especially in a time of stress. They still wanted to know that they were doing what the church thought was best. How did you kind of receive that?
No, I agree. The communication during the pandemic was just so important, and our team worked very hard to ensure that we were providing information to our pastors, to school leadership, to our chancery staff, to faithful as fast as possible. But we all look back on that. Right, they were some scary moments, especially in the beginning, where things were changing so rapidly, and different information was coming to us from different sources, and we were trying our best to keep current. That's why we did a number of podcasts on this very topic, because we had to reevaluate our policies and protocols, and we tried to keep our people current with what we were thinking, with what we were saying, and with what we were doing, and why. We were able to explain why. And there was so much alarming information on news, and people were terrified.
Yeah.
And so I think the podcast allowed us another way of being in communion. That we weren't, maybe physically in the presence of each other, but we were not separated from one another. And the podcast, along with some of our other initiatives, statements, emails, flyers, all that stuff, gave me the chance to speak personally to the faithful. And I could, to the best of my ability, assure them that, we'll get through this, and never to lose hope. And statements and tweets are only so effective in that regard. Share my voice, God willing, communicates even more.
Absolutely. So the next group that reached out wanting to congratulate you are some of the young people that you mentioned before, actually, from our diocese. We'll give a listen to that.
This is Ellie Viana at Bishop Ireton High School. Bishop Burbidge, I want to congratulate you on the 100th episode of the Walk Humbly podcast. We're so grateful for your ministry, both in person as well as on the podcast. While we love your in-person visits and the valuable time you spend with us and everyone throughout the diocese, it's amazing to know that you could reach such a big audience with your podcast. It's inspiring to hear the witness for Christ and the gospel in your podcast, and we are hopeful for many more years of your ministry through that platform. Please know of our prayers for you and your ministry from everyone here at Bishop Ireton. God bless.
Hi, I'm Shannon. Hi, I'm Emma. And we're both members of the Fiat Club here at Bishop O'Connell High School.
And we want to congratulate you on your 100th episode of the Walk Humbly podcast.
This podcast has been a great way to reach people all across the world and of all ages.
And to connect with us personally.
Here's to 100 more!
I'm Bishop Burbidge. We are the student government from St. Paul VI Catholic High School. We want to congratulate you on your 100th episode of the Walk Humbly podcast.
We love seeing you every fall, and we think that your podcast is a great way for you to get in touch with the younger generation. It helps us grow in our faith and reminds us to be humble. You're in our prayers. God bless.
Go Panthers!
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Alex.
I'm Gianna.
I'm Catherine.
I'm Mary Lynn.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Ashley from St. John Paul the Great. Congratulations, Bishop Burbidge, on your 100th episode of the Walk Humbly podcast. Thank you so much for how it's helped the diocese, and we can't wait for what you have in store. Have a great day.
Hi, Bishop Burbidge. Congrats on your 100th podcast. Feels like just yesterday that I was at Word Camp 2020 during COVID for my senior year. And it's crazy how much it's impacted my life just with relationships and my relationship with God, especially in college. And it's helped me stay strong in my faith throughout these past few years here. Looking forward to 100 more podcasts.
All right, Bishop, there's a few voices that sound familiar to you, especially as you go around to our high schools.
That really touched me. That's very, very, very nice. I love visiting our Catholic high schools and being with all of our young people. And it was really great to hear those voices. Every time I'm with our young people, I'm the one who's inspired and energized. And, you know, all the high schools that were represented in those collections of greetings are doing a great job in their own high schools in communications, right. And they're trying to use all the tools available to communicate with the school community, not just what's going on with the school, but with the issues of the day. So I'm so glad our young people are really very, very well trained with social media, but learning how to use that as a gift, as a tool, in the way it's intended to be used by God. So thank you so much, young friends. I'm so proud of all of you.
Yeah, those media departments and clubs, some of them have actually come here to take a look at our studio and understand how we engineered it and made it all work. And so for those who have made this podcast studio possible, those who have given to the BLA, that gift is doubling because the experience they had in coming here is going to create something at our school. So you just see the growth and that kind of contagious joy of the faith that's spread through these tools continues to get passed on. As you look back at 100 episodes, I'm assuming it also helps you look forward and think, okay, so what's next for your ministry? And so when you look into the future, into your crystal ball, so to speak, what do you imagine comes next?
Well, I'm glad everyone's saying we at least 100 more to do, Billy. So that's good.
That's good.
Yeah, I know we have to always evaluate what we're doing now. Is it something we should still be doing, putting our energy or time, resources into it? Not only because we've always done it, but because it's still effective. And again, I can commend you and your team that you're always ready to ask those questions. And you do all the data, the statistics, and all those things to say, hey, this is where we are reaching people. Here's where we're not. So maybe we got to shift our priorities. So look into the future. I'm not so sure what that will bring, but that's a good thing, right? That means that we're open to where the Spirit of God will lead us. And maybe I hope it's the podcast because I like enjoying it. But the day we find out that it's not accomplishing its goal, then we'll switch to something else.
Yeah.
Because we know, again, everything we do is rooted in prayer. So we know that the Spirit of God will lead us to where the Lord needs us to be out in the social media world.
Yeah, and the strategic plan that you've put forward has also helped too, because it's not, the strategic plan lays out, here's what we want to do in the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy, and there's these different pillars, but it also helps us look and say, well, how do we communicate not only about these things, because you heard in the synod sessions that people said there's all this good happening, but we need to know about that more.
Exactly.
And so we have to reevaluate the way that we communicate so that the faithful feel equipped to know their faith and to share it well.
That's right.
And that's exciting.
No,
I get excited about
very,
that.
very exciting. It really is.
Very good. Bishop, a couple more folks reached out. I think you're going to recognize these voices pretty well, actually. They wanted to wish you their best also.
Hi, I'm Mara Moser, host of Catholic Current, the USCCB's weekly news program, and the director of the Catholic Communication Campaign. On behalf of both Catholic Current and the Catholic Communication Campaign, I wish to congratulate Bishop Burbidge and the Diocese of Arlington on its 100 episodes of the Walk Humbly podcast. Keep sharing the good news.
Greetings, Bishop Burbidge. On behalf of all of us here at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, thank you for 100 episodes of the Walk Humbly podcast, and Godspeed toward 100 more, because it is such a great source of information and inspiration as we seek to grow more closely in our relationship with Jesus Christ and in service to one another. So again, Bishop, thank you to you and all of your team. Keep up the great work.
It's really great to hear from James and Mara, two of my friends and colleagues from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I worked closely with them when I was the chairman of the Communications Committee a few years ago. And so great to hear them. And thanks to everyone at the conference for the many ways that they support bishops in their ministry. We've talked about this on the podcast. People ask us about what the role of the conference is. Bishops do not report to the conference. The bishop is entrusted with his diocese. The conference is there and its various offices to support bishops in every diocese throughout the country in enhancing their ministry. So a tremendous resource to us, and many friends and many people from the Diocese of Arlington form the greatest number of people, I think, working at the Conference of Bishops, and they make me very, very proud, and we're grateful to all of you as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it was great to hear from them. And so we teased at the beginning of this podcast that there was, big news for the podcast and the future of it. And so, Bishop, you've decided to officially bless and dedicate the studio.
That's right, Billy. Why didn't we do this before?
I have no idea. When the team recommended it, I thought, yeah, we never did that. How is this?
I know. When you mentioned that to me, that I said, we haven't done that. So we are naming and blessing this studio, this great space, and naming it the St. Clair Studio. Some of our listeners may already know this, but St. Clair of Assisi is the patron saint of televisions. People say, well, how's that possible?
Yeah.
She's also the foundress of the Poor Clares religious order, and we have Poor Clares in our diocese, and I know they pray for us. One of the miracles that is attributed to St. Clair is that she witnessed on the wall in front of her vision of Mass taking place in the Basilica of St. Francis. She was close friends with Francis of Assisi. Because of that, Pope Pius XII named her the patroness of television in 1957. So when she witnessed on the wall, she was actually in her cell at that time.
That's right.
So it really was a miracle. And she was canonized in 1253. And it's providential, I think, that in this age of new technology and ever-emerging communications platforms that we choose this name for our studio. After all, our goal is to provide a window into conversations, the Mass, and catechetical resources. So therefore, I will now step away, Billy, from the microphone for a moment and bless this studio for the first time. And I ask all of our listeners if they just please pause just for a moment and pray with me during this time.
Bishop, thank you so much for this dedication to St. Clair. Do you have any final thoughts as we conclude this 100th episode?
Well, we are in good hands with St. Clair, and I know we will continue to pray for her through her intercession and the gifts of the Holy Spirit, that we will continue to bring the Lord's word, the Lord's message to our listeners. I thank everyone for the time you spend listening to the podcast, and for those who share their feedback with us. It's very, very helpful. And I pray that God will continue to bless us here in the Diocese of Arlington and all that we do, especially in the works of communications, that we will be effective in sharing the good news of the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ with others, and renew our commitment as we go forward to walk humbly with our God. Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly podcast. Make sure you check out more episodes on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can follow me on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, where I offer gospel reflections each morning and share photos and updates of what is going on in the Diocese of Arlington. Stay up to date with news, event information, and inspirational content by subscribing to our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org.